For both of you, Robert and Minette, if this is the best Brexit deal possible, how do you lobby to ensure it's passed by MPs?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. Look, I think that there's a real challenge here, and I find it all the time with our members. This is not the final deal. This is about how we sign off the withdrawal agreement. This is how we get into transition and we agree the future economic relationship. So we are constantly having to regroup with what are the critical asks for MPs, because there's a real danger with so much going on, with Ag Bill, with Immigration Bill, with White Paper coming out for immigration shortly, with Trade Bill, with Brexit relationship. There is so much noise out there, Charlotte, that we are having to constantly consolidate key asks on key themes. At the moment for us, it's not actually lobbying full on immigration. We'll wait till we see the White Paper and the Immigration Bill. This is about trade and standards, the Brexit deal, yes, but also shaping the agricultural bill. So we're constantly providing our members with sort of bullet points of what to focus on, because all this is happening, and the day job is a blooming challenge as well. We've just come through one of the most challenging years for farming, with a very wet, very cold winter, and then a drought. So you speak to most farmers out there, and actually they're more worried about the day job right now, rather than lobbying for the future. But that is, when we've read this 500-page document tonight, we'll regroup again, and we'll be back at it.
I think that's exactly right. The challenge is, where does it fit in? Because it's not just that bill, it's everything else around it. So the exit is one part, but it's how it plays out. And I think our key job is to help government understand that. And what is the right answer? That's really hard. And it's going to continue to move. I think, as you say, Minette, we'll get that bit done, and it's just one part of the jigsaw, and it's then the other bits that follow on behind. It's making sure government and ministers understand where the other bits slide in behind once you go down one particular channel.
We've got another political sort of question here, mentioning the IGD research suggests that 2% of the population have already begun to stockpile food. 43% are thinking about it. If, Paul Rourke asks, that 43% decide to act and the shelves become empty, how will that affect the political landscape, do you reckon, Robert?
Right, okay. Well, it's going to sharpen minds very quickly. If we've got empty shelves, the one thing we know in every harsh winter, it quickly makes people think, the retailers realise supply chains are not as thorough and firm as they would think they are. That's going to bring a lot of spotlight to the politicians on what we need to do. And I think if stockpiling happens, that will help bring into relief the practicality of what we're heading to.
Well, look, there's a reason. I'm delighted at the appointment of David Rutley as Minister of Food and EU Exit, and there's a reason why he's been brought in, because, this is, I think, absolutely on red alert, and it's a real judgment call, I think, for government. When do the rest of us press the button that no deal is a place that you cannot go, that it is looking into the abyss? Because we would go into recession. People will, no matter how much you start telling people not to stockpile food, what are they going to do? They're going to go out and stockpile food. It's a bit like, when you get a weather event and it snowed, they were all told, don't go out and fill your freezers full of bread. What do? They fill their freezers full of bread. So there's a judgment call in all of this. I mean, what I said to Michael Gove a couple of weeks ago when he was articulating the challenges of a no deal, was, when is that face-slapping moment going to happen for Parliament? Because what unnerves all of us is when Dominic Raab says things like, oh, Dover-Calais is important, and you hear Prime Minister's questions, and you think, my God, the trade literacy, the understanding of the impact of all of this is just not there, and politics is rough-riding over the top of all of it. So I think food is a really critical area, and if we're going to live with uncertainty, Charlotte. This won't be the end of a no-deal situation. No deal will run right up until meaningful vote, because they'll be able to keep on putting amendments down. They'll be able to keep on saying they don't support it. So we're not going to get out of no deal. That's going to keep running. And the cut-off date, theoretically, really is the 21st of January, when everybody has to get back in their box and behave. But we're going to live, I'm afraid, with no-deal scenario for a while yet.
Can I ask in a very cynical way, if in a way some empty shelves might help your cause?
They really helped when it snowed. I had a sort of major revolt in my village. Anybody under 35 had not seen snow like it. So they were really challenging our local co-op store manager. And the distribution centres, you know, of course, the little shop up the road stayed open with milk and bread because it sourced the milk from the local dairy. So there was an extraordinary thing that went on in the snow. But it all makes the case. This year was a perfect year for making the case around volatility, around food price spikes, around shortage. But we do have a government, we do have a political system that has been, you know, 43 years out of touch with what's going on and very reliant and deferring blame to Europe for things that have got wrong. You know, the chickens are coming home to roost, and there is a need, you know, and politicians will have to take core responsibility.
Yeah, I think if shelves are empty, it does help bring to sharp focus where food sits in the importance, political importance. Government has two jobs to do essentially. It's to keep your people safe and to feed your people. And if you're not getting the food there, and we're at the heart of that supply chain, well, you've got a big problem.
I just want to move on to agri-supply. As you can see, we've got a question about it. But firstly, let's just do a quick poll. The statement, farmers will be in a position to secure all their agri-supply inputs post 30th of March 2019. So that's the statement. Farmers will be in a position to secure all their agri-supply inputs post the 30th of March 2019. If you can go onto your Slido, do you agree or disagree with that statement? And let's have a look. In fact, nobody thinks anything. Oh, there we go. Mildly agree. Okay. Oh, no. Wow. Wow. Okay. So farmers, and we have a question about this from someone who's shy. Will agri-supply inputs be available for farmers post-Brexit, and what contingent plans are in place? Robert?
Well, something we've been talking to members about. The committees have picked this up, the sectors have looked at it, and I think internally there's probably a bit of a mixed view about it at the moment. Some people think that bulk products will be relatively easy still to get into the UK, that the trading arrangements will probably work, particularly where it's third country status already, it will continue as third country status. But I come back to my point. You look at the technical notices, they are not clear about that, so you don't know. When it comes to containerised inputs, there is a real concern. You know, it's been mentioned 3 times now. Dominic Raab has just realised that we're connected to the continent in the southeast corner of the country. There's an enormous amount of supply products that come through the Channel Tunnel, and yet if that support, or whether it comes by roll-on, roll-off ferry or through the tunnel, and that source is not readily available, we're going to have some major challenges. And the point about that question is exactly right, that if you can't get a crop protection product from a European manufacturing plant into the UK at the right time next spring, and that's too late to control the pest problem, whatever it is in the field, then you're going to have that's going to have a yield hit on your members. That has an impact on the processing capacity, which ultimately has a knock-on at the retail shelf edge, and an impact ultimately, I guess, on balance of trade. That can't be what the intention is to end up with.
I mean, the critical dependencies for this industry, so if we take animal medicines, fertiliser, chemicals, you know, we are very, very reliant on Europe for those. I mean, 90% of our animal vaccines come and are made in the EU. But they are all, of course, going to have a tariff on them in a no-deal situation. So not only have you seen a decimation of the tariff for food coming in, you're going to have a tariff on your inputs. So, and loss of market access. So those critical dependencies, I think, you know, at the moment it's a sort of undiscussed area, but you cannot, the more we look into, the more the team looks into a no-deal scenario, the more we uncover. I have to say it is a really, really stark picture, and it's hard to see how you sort of, you know, effectively keep the lights on.
The majority of people agree with you that farmers will not be in a position. So what happens then?
That's our challenge to government, though, is actually to get that message into the heart of government.
But no deal.
That there is a real concern in a no-deal world. It's the supply inputs. It won't just be us, ultimately, as a sector. But you look at the wider economy, there's medical products that have got to come in. You know, so at some point, there's a line of lorries on the continental side, whether you've got human medicine, animal farming inputs, or pink fluffy toys. Somehow, someone's got to make the decision about which lorry gets on the ferry first and comes through whatever friction there is in order to get into the UK, and then got to be distributed.
But it's so deeply political now. I mean, the really interesting thing for me with what has happened in the last 24 hours is this is what the Labour Party have been asking for. From day one, this was the Labour Party's ask. And yet they're still saying, well, no, we don't support the plan. So, would they, in a worst case scenario, would they force us out in order to trigger an election? Because they are so determined to have an election at all costs. It's just political at every level.
Okay, some questions about sort of standards and food. Again, anonymous. How do you plan to inform the public about the importance of high food standards and domestic food production?
Well, this is why we're sort of doing the forward planning, why we're bringing a whole range of stakeholders together. For the Moral Imperative meeting that we held on Friday, we had Sarah Mukherjee, we had Tim Lang, we had Mike Clark from the RSPB, we had Sean Spears. We had a whole mix of people, because the wider understanding, the wider conversations that we can have, the better. The retailers are all committed, basically, to maintaining the standards. You only got to look at things like Horsegate and how they brought the country to a standstill. The challenge is in the whole of the food service sector and the potential for fraud and reaching out to consumers to say that, and we see, more demand year on year for people to buy British food. We see the discounters build their businesses on the back of British food. Aldi and Lidl want you to come in and buy nappies or television, but they do it on the back of getting people in to buy British. So I think we start this from a great place of strength. You look at the journey of food over the last 20 years and food production. Assurance has driven seismic change. Very easy to be doom-laden in all of this, but actually we are in a really good place. And maintaining the support of our home market is absolutely A1 critical. But they do, as I said, they do think that globally food is food.
I think AIC is well positioned here. Through our assurance schemes, there's some real stability that can be had, but that's actually incumbent upon all of us to make sure, whether it's UFAS, FEMAS or TASC, those schemes are made aware to the politicians, because at the moment I suspect the vast majority of them have no idea about the assurance that goes on around that supply chain. And that feeds right up through, so whether it's going on farm, going into a horticultural unit, it's getting out there. And that's the bit where we've got an opportunity to highlight what is happening.
Let's take a question from the floor. Don't forget that there's a microphone just there. Just tell us who you are.
Thank you very much. If you...
Just tell us who you are before you start.
I beg your pardon?
Tell us who you are.
The name's Haygate. I'm a food manufacturer. The question I'd like to ask is, I fully support maintaining the high standards. I'd love to know how you're going to maintain those without legislation to prevent goods coming in below those standards from people that we wish to export to.
Absolutely. I mean, that is the point that I hope I made, that legislation is the only way of achieving it. Otherwise it is just warm words. And to say that, Parliament won't allow it, it'll be too late for Parliament. So the only way of achieving this is to put the legislation into the Ag Bill and then into the Trade Bill. Now, I think there are reservations about doing that, but that is the only way of achieving this. We don't yet know, and this is, I think, another challenge, we don't yet know what our FTA package looks like. The US has, a trade package like that, so does other members of the Commonwealth, of which agriculture is a key component of those trade deals. We, on the other hand, have been under-exporting in agricultural products for years within the European structure. So what is the ambition? What does the trade package look like? And when people talk about high standards and protecting of our standards, how? And the only way to do it is through that legislation. That is it, full stop. It is yes or no.
Surely that will affect your exports.
What, hold back the exports?
If you were a country that was prevented by legislation.
For financial, I mean, I think this is the whole challenge of it. Shankar Singham the other day at the Welsh conference, when he stood on the platform and he said, of course, agriculture and food are the problem in all of this. Financial services around the world, you don't want to be held back by agriculture and food. Agriculture and food are always the last chapter in any trade deal to be agreed. That's why CETA crashed at the 11th hour, because 3 Belgian dairy farmers got together and said, it ain't coming through. So agriculture, is the most impacted sector in all of this, the least understood probably. But that is the challenge. Agriculture holds back wider FTAs. That standards piece. but it's critical to our industry, and it's critical to test the honesty in all of this in order to shape a future support system. You know, the agriculture bill is pivotal to the new policy, so it sets the foundations for what the future should look like. It's a very, very fundamental question to the future of our industry.
In being brief, getting it right, that's
Sorry.
what we've got to do.
Sorry,
Getting the answer across to government is, how do we make sure we get the right trade balances in there? And that's about lobbying our message, and it's back to what I was saying earlier. We've all got a role to play in making sure every Member of Parliament understands this, because there's that lack of clarity and understanding about what delivering an ag bill and a trading relationship and future trade negotiations looks like. And we're the ones that hold the magnifying glass and can help people understand exactly what the concerns are and what needs to be done. And we then have to work on getting them to listen to us.
Talking of lobbying, another question here. Given the potential threat to our competitive position on international trade, what efforts are the NFU and others putting into ensuring government departments and the public sector have a British first food procurement policy?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And I think for us, you know, in some ways my job is a popularity contest, because I'm not in it unless I'm popular, certainly with our council. But there is a real need for us to show leadership and to not be held back by people who effectively are just wanting to maintain the status quo. When I say change, it really is about embracing change if we're going to drive the industry forwards to the world-class industry that we want to build and maintain. So, you know, things like going to a one-stop on assurance, you know, taking out the politics, being able to allow all opportunities for consumers and for farmers and growers to produce to, I think is a really important step in the right direction. But, you know, we have to look at the business plan for British agriculture, where we wanted to go, how we wanted to get there, and not be too held back. Although we're a membership organisation, I think it's really important that we articulate why we're saying what we're saying, why we're planning what we're planning, and really keep focused on that commercial business plan. You know, I keep on saying to Michael Gove, you know, these are businesses. This is what the rural economy is built on, and you have to treat them as such. You have to have a commercially focused Brexit. It can't just be, with the best one in the world, about, you know, effectively tree guards and as I've rudely said to him, probably planting daffodils. And I think he's a man on a journey, and he is really getting, I think, the commercial aspect of these businesses. I mean, you know, for you, it is totally about a commercial future and respecting that and understanding it, actually.
We've heard many governments talk about having a policy of buy British first, and actually it's never come to anything so far. And we can't be nepotistic about what we want. Actually, we've got to be competitive. We've got to create the environment in which our businesses can flourish. So it is not about having necessarily a buy British first policy. It's about creating the political environment and business environment in which we are the first choice.
We've talked a lot about...
So it's turning the question around.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about lobbying, and as someone has just asked, we're talking about influencing politicians. As they put it, politicians follow public opinion, they don't lead. Should we not be influencing the public, would be their question here.
But a big part of what I do in the last 6 months when I've talked about messages AIC are putting out is who's our audience for this, actually. You know, a big part of it is talking to our members, and then the next part is talking to policymakers, stakeholders, politicians, and then the third part is talking to the public. And we've got to be clear about what our messages are, what we want to give to each sector. And that's not necessarily the same message at the same time.
Absolutely.
Another question here on standards. Does it make sense to keep EU standards, in inverted commas, in this anonymous question, based on protectionism, not science? Most standards are private supply chain standards, so why fear? Choice editing will continue, need to separate WTO-compliant import rules versus private standards.
Well, again, it comes back. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think the future alignment is absolutely yet to be discussed. You know, I don't think anybody, why would you sign up to being a rule taker forever and a day? You're in a far worse position. But it's you know, the alignment situation, it's all a part of a bigger conversation, I think, Charlotte. And it's going to take time. You know, you concentrate. What I said about concentrating on the next steps. You know, the sugar beet industry, you know, we've just lost the emergency use application for one of the most sustainable sugar producing countries in the world. That's a political decision. You know, and the challenge is to make sure this is an evidence-based, risk-based approach going forward, and that, you know, science to a certain extent drives it, but that politics don't. I mean, that is the challenge for us as we become a sovereign economy again.
Correct. Exactly. The logic is science should be the right route, but politics will play in protectionism, and we've got to be clear what we want.
Question over here.
If you could change just one thing about the agriculture bill, what would it be? Sorry, it's Debbie Baker from CF Fertilisers.
Just one thing.
Debbie, the bill with the right policy is a really good bill. The bill, if you and I could put the policy on it, could be fantastic. You go and put the wrong policy on it, bearing in mind you've handed government enough powers and enough flexibility that if they want to do up Nelson's column, they can. That's the challenge with it. So the bill is not the issue. The bill is fine. It's the policy that you choose to put over it. So, I think those amendments of pause, vary, reverse are incredibly important. The Welsh powers, I realise this isn't one, but the Welsh powers into the English bill would help, making sure that it is tied to the country's needs of the food that they warrant. And at the moment, that isn't in there. They could go and, they're going to stop Gatwick Airport deciding that it's going to plant hedges around it and pull down public funding to do it, or Heathrow or anybody else. That's the problem. You've got to tie this in some way to the people that are providing the market goods, whether that's renewable energy, water scarcity, food security. It's just not a one-word answer, sadly, like so many other things. And we try and cover it all off in 2 minutes, and you really need to sit people in a dark room for days on end.
If I could only choose one thing about the bill I would change, I think it would be research and development. Because if you get that bit right, it flows down through the rest of business. But
not if you're spending it on Gatwick.
I was told I could only change one part of the bill. Where do I go? So,
You're playing within the rules, Minette. Just a quick clarification point, Minette. Can you clarify your point on the Iceland add-on palm production? Are you saying all palm production is bad? Palm oil
Look,
production?
palm oil is a separate aspect to all of this. It's the fact that the UK, Northern Europe, is one of the best food-producing parts of the world. It is an absolute treasured jewel, if you like, in the world of global food production. So we export our conscience and our production at our absolute peril, but we've got to make the case for why the UK can and should continue to produce food, striving to be ever more sustainable, and making sure that we are the custodians of the country and caring for the environment. But the point that video shows is if you export your production, you export your conscience, the damage that you can do. And the UK has to take responsibility for the people that it has here and the country that we all live in. So that's why I mention it. The palm oil aspect is another aspect.
the palm oil is a really important point there, because you can't grow it in the UK. So you've got to buy it from somewhere. And it's so critical to a lot of inputs. So where are you going to go? And one of the things the AIC has worked on, we've worked on over the last 6 months, is working on a responsible supply of palm oil credits. Now, we're close to having something that we can talk a little more widely about, but getting to a place where you can have source responsible palm oil is the first step of that. I don't think farm inputs can operate readily without it. I don't know what the alternative would be. It's not readily available. But the first step is doing it responsibly. And I think what Iceland has done is captured an unbelievable moment of public opinion without people realising where palm oil goes in the products they eat and what they would do about sourcing it differently.
We could displace it.
Sorry,
We're nearly at coffee. I have your best interests at heart, ladies and gentlemen. A very quick final question from David Shepherd. Do you have a view on a second referendum, and do you think the farming vote would reverse their previous majority vote to leave if another vote takes place?
How are your members feeling about this?
We don't look. We never rule out anything, but at this moment in time, as I sit here today, we don't support the people's vote. Farmers, have they changed their mind? Some have, some haven't. You know, farmers were made a lot of promises. You know, I think a lot of lies were told. You were going to have a free trade deal, that was a given. You were going to have more money, and you were going to have a bonfire of regulation. Well, that to many farmers sounded really, really appealing, and who could blame them? So they were promised that. They were promised that by leading politicians, Boris Johnson being one of them. So, you know, some of them have changed their minds, some of them haven't. A personal thought of mine is to go back to the country again, basically after 2 years, saying, you know, we as the political establishment, we couldn't agree on any of this. We haven't got a plan. We're coming back out to you because we didn't like what you said first time, so we're going to come back out again. I think it'd be disastrous, and I think I've never known so many people politically homeless right now. So, you know, there's time, Charlotte. Will we be into extension of Article 50? We could be. We'll do anything to avoid a no deal. But I think there are real challenges with going back to the people saying we can't do it. We're coming back because we didn't like what you said the first time round. You know, lots of people have not changed their minds and they're fed up with talking about it.
I think a second referendum is predicated around how do we get out of what the Brexit deal is. Because if that's voted down by within Parliament, you then presumably trigger a vote of no confidence in the government. You might imagine that the Conservatives wouldn't support that, so you then end up in a locked position where you can't agree the legislation, but you can't have a vote, which is effectively a vote of no confidence, but you can't secure a vote of no confidence to trigger a general election. What's your route out of that? Presumably that starts to take you down the route of a second referendum. But what that would be questioned around, well, that's a whole other scenario again. And when would you do it?
Well, Theresa May is Prime Minister. She will not do it. You know, it is no deal, Remain, or back the plan. That's what it is.
And on that note...